Alright, so we're gonna build a simple interest calculator, which is just principal, can't type, principal times interest, or I will say rate, principal times rate times time. It's a standard formula for simple interest. So we're going to need the amount financed. We're going to set that equal to 0. I always do that. I always set all my variables to 0 or to nothing so that I know that like they're set to something and they're not just floating. So interest rate is equal to 0.00, and I'm making that a float, so it's automatically a float. The other one's an integer, which is just a whole number. Interest rate I want to float, and then years financed is going to be equal to 0, and then total due, which is going to be our interest plus our amount financed. I'll set that equal to 0. So we're going to set our amount financed. Amount financed is equal to input, how much is your loan, and then our next one is going to be interest rate, input again. Input works on Python 2.7 for numbers, but it won't work for strings. You have to use a raw input. So for right, I'll change it later because we're gonna have to do some things to make sure it's a number. But for right now, this is just a simple way to learn simple inputs, just simple stuff. So input, what is your interest rate? And then years financed is going to be equal to input, and same thing, how long in years is the loan, or something grammatically correct. And so what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the simple interest, and so we're going to say yeah, let's do that. Total interest, we'll do it as total interest due, we'll call it 0, and so let's say total interest due is equal to amount financed times interest rate times years financed. And then what that'll do is that'll calculate the total interest, but I'll go over something later. If they enter, say the user enters something that's not a decimal, it'll round off like whatever is a fraction. I'll explain in a second. And then we'll just go, I'll just show you, print total interest due. So if I go over and call it Python interest calculator.py. How much is your loan? We'll say 1,000. We'll say our interest rate is 5. We won't say it's 5%. We'll just say it's 5. And we haven't done anything, so it's gonna be wrong. It should be like $50 a year. So total, I'll do 5 years. Should be like 250. How long is your year? So it's gonna come out to 25,000. So what we want to do is we want after we ask what the interest rate is, we want it to equal we want the interest rate to equal the interest rate, whatever they enter, divided by 100. So we get the total interest, but in a decimal. So let's try that again. How much is your loan? It's 1,000. Interest rate 5%. How many years? 5. So it's going to be 0, and that's because when they entered it right here, they entered a whole number, and when you divide it by 100, it's going to end up as 0 because it can't do it. So a simple fix is to multiply the interest rate times 1.0. So you're multiplying it by 1, but what you're doing is you're converting it to a float, so you have a decimal place. And so we'll try it again. How much is your loan? $1,000. Interest rate is 5. Years is 5. So our total interest is going to be $250 for the whole year, or for the whole 5 years, the whole term of the loan. It's not really what we want. We want the total due. So what we'll do is we'll go total due is equal to total interest plus amount financed, and then we'll do total due, and it should give us $1,250. 5%, 5, $1,250. It's pretty simple, but it gets you going on integers, amount financed. If they want to enter like a decimal, they can, but it doesn't really matter. Interest rate, it just kind of gets you going on using variables, and I think this is a good example just because like most people deal with loans at some point. So I would mess with it, like start entering like random numbers. So like if we do it again and do 1,000, and the reason I'm choosing 1,000 is you can kind of figure out any multiples divided by 1,000 because it's like powers of 10 interest rate. So we'll do like 2.75 and then 5 years, and then it'll start breaking it down. So I think that's a